juice, watermelon and ginger, and cucumber and ginger and all of those different things. Now we need to move our agricultural sector beyond the just producing the bulk and the raw materials to a production sector where we can create a number of cottage industries. And those cottage industries have already started. So we need to get our agricultural sector to the stage where we can provide those crops for persons, because believe you me, a number of people have been able to pay bills during this period by selling natural juices at $5 a bottle. You sell 100 of those bottles in a day or a week, and you have enough that you can put food on your table. And so we can work in that way. So the government started, and I believe that that program has died in terms of planting 1 million trees. Can those 1 million trees be an orchard instead of just planting trees for shade or anything like that? Can those 1 million trees be an orchard where the government is planting dwarf golden apple trees so that it is easier for persons to pick the fruit when they're ready? The guavas, all of that we need to roll into our agricultural industry. We've already started to do it with breadfruit, and we have breadfruit chips being produced. We've already started to do it with sweet potatoes, and you have companies producing sweet potato chips. We need to start doing it with the fruit as well, so that we would have, but don't just plant trees just like that. Be constructive and be forward, strategic in the way that you're doing it. And we have the Soil Conservation Commission, the ones who do the work on the seedlings and stuff like that for the crops. Now, if you look at Florida and parts of Canada has been able to produce an orchard or a fruit industry because they would have done the necessary genetic testing and modification on their crop so that they are able to produce a crop that would give you a product which you can take to the market, which you can sell and use for what you want it for. Which is all, they also did the variations that you can make it easier to cultivate and easier to pick, and it would have a longer shelf life where necessary.
You're speaking
we have that ability here in Barbados with regard to agriculture because we did it with sugar. We have genetically modified the sugar crop in Barbados to give us a crop that we can work with. So we need to take agriculture from just the fork and the hoe and to apply technology to agriculture and also to provide agriculture with the finances necessary. Give me just one more minute. Because
Andrea, there are other speakers who have to get their points in. Save some for later. Save some for later. I have to manage this time very efficiently because we are on a limited time frame. And while what you're saying is relevant and important, I would beg you to leave some for later and let some other persons have a chance.
Just one more quick point.
Andre.
All right, you will come back to it.
Yes, you can come back to it, no problem. Because Corey, I'm coming at you. And what I'm coming at you with is very relevant to this current context as well, in that we are discussing the alternatives to tourism. We've discussed agriculture. We've discussed the national reset time and alternatives even to the educational system. But labor is a vital cog in this wheel. And from this particular scenario, we realize that those who are the most important elements within the tourism industry and within the economic structure of this country have not been getting a fair break. Of late now, we've been hearing of the treatment of some of those in the industry, which is appalling, but to which we have no answers because we're not hearing the voice of labor on behalf of these workers. People are going home and they are being left to go to the tribunal for monies owed to them, while properties which they have worked for are opening branches elsewhere. You would have seen the demonstrations. You would have also have heard of what has happened to the prison officers who, through no fault of their own, are being focused upon, even though the prison officers and the bus crawl and all those other issues are not central to the main point, which is that they didn't bring the COVID to Barbados. But their treatment also has been reprehensible. And I want you to tell us your perspective on the labor context at present.
Thank you so much, Irene. Good night to the panel. Good night to Barbados. Happy New Year's to everyone. Hope everyone had a really fantastic Christmas, despite the numerous challenges which have been foisted upon us. I think that's the best way to put it. To jump straight into it, Irene, I'm going to try to answer. I'm going to try to give a perspective on everything that you said, but there's so much within that statement to really put a little piece on. But let me start by saying,
shoot straight, Corey, shoot straight.
I feel as if for the entire year of 2020, since COVID has really come on our shores in the middle of March, we've almost been on autopilot. And an autopilot while we are hoping for the best, without really having a true plan. I felt we never had a true plan when we got our first 2 cases. And then in about 3 weeks, we morphed into, I think it was almost close to 40 cases. And when I look at the comparable analysis with the Caribbean islands, our rate was even faster than Jamaica. Jamaica being a place that has a bigger population. And I thought we didn't have a really true plan and we were caught off guard. And it continued right up until a few days, a week ago, when some would say the wrong stuff hit the fan. I know we really need to reset and refocus and decide how we're going to go from here, taking this pandemic as serious as we should have taken it from the get-go. And through all this, as you said, the workers in this country has been really, really hit hard. You know, don't be fooled at all. I feel as if the workers in this country has been under severe pressure. In some cases, they have been struggling to get their unemployment money. As we sit here tonight and we talk and we have a chat, some are still trying to get their monies. And as you said before, there are some companies that they would have closed or open back up with a new name. There are some of your workers that have come to work and just saw a notice on the wall or the door, the gate, that the place has been closed. Some are being sent home without adequate notice, without their documentations to go to the NAS. We've even seen demonstrations on the streets in front of some businesses with no union representation. Yet still these companies are supposed to be, these workers are supposed to be part of the workers' union. And I think that in a COVID environment, this is the time when the leaders of workers need to anticipate the potential problems that can exist and can crop up and plan accordingly and put things in place to protect the workers. I mean, we would have seen the hotel on the West Coast that at one point they sent out letters saying that they would pay the workers their monies. Then they went back on that word and decided that they needed to get their monies from the government because they had none. And they went on dead, they had none. And then in a few days, you heard that they changed their mind and they're going to pay the workers. And this is the kind of frivolous actions that we see. What do we really believe? What intrinsic research are we doing, demanding from these companies to see their bucks if you want to turn over this kind of responsibility to the government of Barbados, and defining the government of Barbados as the taxpayers? Because if we are going to have to foot the severance for these workers, don't just come and tell me, well, you're not earning money. These are things that you need to sit down and you need to discuss, and government needs to put things in place whereby these things can be done in terms of examining the accounts, seeing their books. Because if one company does it, It opens a barifa of further hotels, hospitality businesses, other businesses indirectly affected by COVID to come and say, we're not making any money. We're going to send home our workers.
Precedent.
We're going to leave it to the government to do.
Precedent.
And these are things we haven't been doing. I will take it to a more recent situation with G4S workers at the airport. And yet again, another couple would have breached the COVID protocols, left their hotel, made their way all up to the airport, made their way past the check-in counter, and only in the departure lounge, the only thing that they did not do was actually get to the boarding. This is how close they got, This is a massive concern. And realizing that one was positive, the airport workers were put in the quarantine. G4S workers were asked to go home and await further instructions for testing. Transportation wasn't even provided for these workers. This now thereby puts the ordinary Bajan in harm's way because some of these workers are taking public transportation to get home. Unsuspecting taxi drivers who are looking to make money in a down environment, thinking that he's just shuttling somebody to their house when he's potentially shuttling a COVID positive person. And yet again, you must ask, in the workplace today, if someone is shown to come with COVID or to be exposed to COVID, what protocols are in the workplace to safeguard workers? Because we can't just be sending home workers or asking workers to get home how they can or to quarantine themselves. Let's face it, this is Barbados. Most of these people are not living in mansions. Where are they supposed to sleep? In the chicken coop? In the pen?
Yes. But
some people still sleep in a bed with their children.
That leads then, Corey, now a perfect segue into this current situation this week with the prison officers, where we would have spoken out about the treatment of the G4S persons who were sent home to quarantine. And by the next round, we heard that the prison officers were sent to the Hilton at the state's expense. But I don't know if persons know that when they were sent to the Hilton at the state's expense, if they wanted room service, they had to pay for it. Every call coming out of the room, they have to pay for it. It is not a situation that they would have visited upon themselves. Yet again, the people of Barbados are being penalized at every step of the way. These workers are quarantined at a hotel. They had to complain about where the food was being placed for them. That was changed because it was being left on the ground at the door. And whilst that may happen in Australia or elsewhere, Bajans will feeding a dog. And they protested. So they changed the method of feeding them. But if they wanted room service, they had to pay for it. As I said, every call, anything outside of what they feel you need, you have to pay for. Meanwhile, their families are at home. These are families they would have been exposed to all along. And we're not only talking about Christmas week, we're talking about prior, because remember the dateline tells you that between the 20th and the 23rd, there were persons who were ill, which leads me to say that the virus would have had to have been at the prison prior to this latest blow up, where they're trying to make you feel that the bus crawl was the center of all evil. Do the math and you will realize that again, transparency is not there. The transparency is not. And then you speak to the numbers and you don't get an analysis of the 33 who were not in the prison. And we know for a fact that the West Coast has problems and specific businesses would have had problems. And it carries you right back, if you do the tracing, to a business on the West Coast where a visitor would have attended, where a prison officer would have worked. But we're not hearing any of that. And that is why people are not trusting and people are angry, because they're not hearing everything. And this now leads me to you, Verla. And I want to throw it to you as leader of this party, because I know that you would have spoken numerous times about closing the borders. Give your perspective, and I'm going to contextualize it, because what has happened now has shown us that even if we were comfortable as a country with how government was handling the outbreak in the beginning, we are totally uncomfortable now. And it seems to be that the capacity which the government would have had in March and April is still the capacity they have at the height of the winter season, because we're seeing lack of enforcement in too many areas to lead me or any thinking Barbadian to believe that all the bases are covered. Obviously, there was no capacity building, which leads to how was the strategy outlined? Because normally in the hotel industry, and I don't want to keep this long, I can get to you. In the hotel industry, you know your capacity for winter. The BHTA knows the capacity of their properties for winter. So how is it, or did the BHTA, the Ministry of Health, and the COVID unit, and all of the persons who are engaged in this process, did they not meet to sit to discuss how we will have to ramp up our capabilities for the winter season, which everybody knows would see an influx because we're not closing our borders. And not only that, we'll be seeing an influx from a high-risk destination like the United Kingdom, where even the Brits were not able to control the behavior of the Brits. So that is where the ball was dropped. So I want to ask you now to give your perspective when you're speaking about closing the borders, because right now, when you look at it, over 40 countries have closed their borders to the United Kingdom. We have not, but we are yet to hear what mitigating efforts have been made to ramp up our capacity that we would have had at the beginning of the trickle to the full-blown threat that we now have in Barbados, because we're not hearing that. We need to hear numbers, and we need to know how our people are being protected, because we did a real good job of protecting ourselves.
Thank you, Irene. There's so much to unpack there, and I know that there's just limited time. So our initial reaction was that we are a small fry in the scope of the world, in that a vaccine is not coming to us first. We knew that. It is already being administered in countries. First, we heard first quarter, now we're hearing down the end of the first quarter, and I suspect that can is going to get kicked a little further down the road until it is more affordable for starters, and until it is more widely available as well. So in that context of having a killer that was not containable outside of creating a space around yourself, it seemed wisdom to scale back ourselves, spend the time advancing Ryan's position in terms of giving financial facility to small businesses so that they would be able to expand. Just think about how far $300 million would have gone if 300 small businesses had access to it, or to go Andre's way and develop our cottage industries to the point where we can have our specialty products that we can sell and make revenue. Now, that was the focus initially. Now, we are democratic. We didn't get our own way. The decision was made to keep the borders open. The onus then is on government to ensure that our borders are so tightly policed that COVID doesn't get a look into the country. That is next step. If you have decided that you must have the borders open, then it is your responsibility as government to protect those borders, just as you would do everything within your power to stop contraband from coming in, just as you would do everything in your power to stop firearms from coming in, to stop drugs from coming in. It is your duty to the people of Barbados as the administration in office to ensure that you have done all in your power to keep COVID at bay. I am not satisfied, and I believe I speak on behalf of the people of Barbados when I say that we are not satisfied that enough was done. Back in September, the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners put up a red flag and said, listen, these protocols do not go far enough, I beg your pardon, that we needed to be honoring that 10 to 14 window in terms of what is a reasonable quarantine, that we needed to be mindful of where persons were coming from. They repeated when it was clear to everyone who was breathing in December that things were going awry. We were already hearing the complaints coming from the workers in the tourism sector. We were getting reports coming out that persons were breaching quarantine, and it was all being swept under the carpet. Even those 2 UK citizens who Corey referred to, who almost got on a plane with one of them being positive, even when approached in relation to that incident, I can only describe the response of the Minister of Tourism as dismissive. They were not being taken seriously. So we can't then say that government has done all that it can in order to protect the citizens from COVID. So to my mind, it is a smokescreen only to focus on a bus crawl. Mm-hmm. Yes, it is a super spreader event, but we have to remember a lot of things. One, up until that point, there were several social events. 2,
Correct.
That same day, there was a different type of mass gathering involving a different type of transport, a more upscale type of transport, because it was on the sea and on the beach and using pleasure craft, using yachts, using catamarans. But it was yet another form, because we seem to forget that promoters are businessmen too. Promoters are businessmen too. They usually, because they don't have access to capital, they're putting up their own funds to make money. So whilst we may look at a 15-second video of people walking up, we then lose the larger picture of a businessman who is engaging in a commercial enterprise. That any one of those catamarans on the sea Boxing Day was also engaging in commercial enterprise. And so we are asked to focus in on what really is a secondary event, because the information coming from out of the prison, I have been informed, is that the first prison officer to test positive had been on sick leave from before Christmas.
Exactly.
Was
which is
on sick leave already. Did not attend the bus crawl. And if that information is correct, then that focus that we are asked to have on a bus crawl is simply to put blinkers on us so that we are not paying attention to the real issue.
It's true.
And perhaps that is why they can't find patient 0.
Because
they're focusing on a secondary issue. They are not opening themselves up to the possibility that something happened before that bus crawl. That is the critical event. Yes, the bus crawl spread it, but no prisoner went on the bus crawl. And 113 of them in the first batch. Those young men are calling, they are frantic. The last time there was a major outbreak at the prison, it was chickenpox. And virtually 100% of the inmate population contracted it. They are justifiably nervous, okay? But being asked to focus in on one event, if we were to comply, which fortunately the Barbadian people have seen through it, if we were to comply, would be to take our eye off the ball. The fact of the matter is that there were serious and significant breaches occurring before the crawl that very likely fed into that as a secondary event. And yes, it spread, and it spread like wildfire. But we can hear them being outed, but we can't get any details about the other 2 admitted only on questioning. The other 2 clusters that we have only been told are on the West Coast. We don't know where, how, when, or with whom
And the journalists.
Also noticed, I must say, I have noticed that the Ministry of Health and Wellness yesterday did not issue their usual little blue box of statistics. It disappeared yesterday. I messaged them and asked them where it is, and I got a generic response.
Transparency.
But we must, as a people, remember that this administration came into office riding a wave of transparency, and we have to hold their feet to the fire. We are also a highly educated population. Give us the information. When you hold something back, we are satisfied that it is awful. It may not be that awful, but you can operate when you have full disclosure. Then you know how it is that you need to maneuver yourselves. But when we have this explosion, as we have had in the last 48 hours, going on 36 now, of COVID in Barbados, you can't identify patient zero, which from my research with WHO and PAHO is the very definition of community spread. You cannot locate the epicenter. You don't know the nucleus. So if it is that we have these scenarios, should we not, even if our overarching policy is that we must continue with tourism in some form, should we not, in light of recent events, be closing our borders to allow us to get on top of what we have? If the planes are still coming in, people have been sending me their plane spots. So they've been showing the path of planes still coming to Barbados. So on top of trying to get a handle on an outbreak, we continue to have incoming traffic of persons, I'm not going to say who potentially bring COVID, but who require testing. On top of the contact tracing testing that we have to do for ourselves and our people. And I am satisfied that in any equation where you are balancing the economy and the people, and it is the health of the people that is at stake, that trumps everything else.
Correct.
And to pause for a 2-week period right now, yes, it is at the height of the winter season, but the US Embassy, they mind that people already had paid a book to have visa interviews. They consider that right now is not the time to be having people in their building. End of story. Other countries have made the choice either to close their borders entirely or to close their borders to countries that are high risk. We have chosen to do neither one of the two. And that means then that when you are making statements like we are following the science, you have to ask them which science class they're in, whose science they are following, because the science, we can read and we know the science ourselves. And the science says the quarantine of a particular period and you shorten it because you don't want to get the tourists vexed. Well, as short as it is, the tourists are still vexed. So you could as well make it long.
And Bajans are vexed too. And the thing about this is that science has to be balanced with common sense.
Of course. And the thing is that if the tourists coming in were strictly policed and the Barbadians who minded themselves the entire time we were in lockdown, yes, we have slipped up in recent times, but let's face it, a citizenry will follow their leadership. So if the leadership is not taking it seriously, how then do you expect your citizens to take it seriously?
That's agreed.
But
and after all, the leaders agreed to 65 parties for all year's night, right?
And a by-election in the middle of a pandemic too.
Thank you. So if you are not taking it seriously as the administration of the day, you then do not have it in your arsenal to be wagging your finger at citizens, to be threatening them. I could pull the brakes, I could press the brakes a little harder. That is unnecessary when you didn't apply the brakes for yourself. And now we're slipping down the hill. It can be arrested, but we need to have that pause. We need to have, don't just say it, you know, because there's a difference between activity and achievement. You could be turning and turning and turning and achieving nothing at all. So don't just tell us to pause. Show us that you are pausing. Just take a moment. Let us get a handle on this. There's still contact tracing in relation to one event, and they have 3 at least that they're acknowledging. Okay, so we need in this moment to be holding that pause, and whilst we're pausing, having that discussion as to how Barbados moves itself forward.
All right, so to Marian, health. We are caught up in the COVID-19 pandemic, but I think we have to remember that 60% of Barbadians suffer from NCDs. We have to remember that that is a market that we cannot not serve. And I want you to give us your perspective, because quite rightfully COVID-19 has been focused upon the detection and quarantine sites. But we need to look at the public healthcare system and the strain that is going to be putting on that system at present. We saw, for example, the list of polyclinics which are being commandeered now as testing centers. But we still have the diabetics, the hypertensives, the kidney failure persons. And as I said, between 2010 and 2030, we did the research, and it was like 60% of our population needs to have that daily attention, which means that somewhere along the line, the ball may get dropped there. So what do you recommend in this particular context?
Yeah, I mean, I think the government is moving fast without thinking. What they identified the super spreader event, but we almost had a super spreader event yesterday when they asked everyone to go to one polyclinic as well, right? So they have to move, they have to think through their actions, and what we're seeing playing out now is poor planning, as you said. They're the same mode they were back in April of 2020, and they have not scaled up their preparedness and their readiness. The Ministry of Health and Wellness, it's one thing to focus on the persons that will be affected by COVID, but rightly, as you said, Irene, how do we protect regular citizens who are at risk? We definitely need to introduce specific testing programs for the staff at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the Geriatric Hospital.
And the private ones too.
And anywhere there is healthcare for elderly, we need to have a program where there's got some level of continuous testing or overview, because those are the persons that are in charge of the most vulnerable in our society, right? So that needs to be done with some immediacy. We have to make sure persons that are tracking their blood pressure, their blood sugar, how can we give them the devices at a low cost that they themselves can do some level of monitoring at home? How can we introduce technology as well into the mix, where persons can communicate with the doctors or the physicians and nurses using technology to communicate the readings, to communicate how they're doing and so forth, as opposed to commuting and congregating in the hospital or at polyclinics. We need to get busy in terms of finding sustainable solutions to help to prevent the spread of the disease, to help to keep people at home that does not necessarily have to go, they're not working and so forth, and they're more vulnerable. So low cost blood pressure monitors and blood sugar devices needs to be a thing for now. What are the duty rates on these things? What do we need to take off in terms of duty? How can we talk to the retailers to bring down the cost? What role can government play to make sure more devices are accessible? How can we introduce technology? How can we get these appointments online? Give me your reading. have a discussion more. A lot of people go to the clinics just have a discussion with the doctor. So how can those take place using technology? And for sure, the vulnerable, the elderly has to be protected, and the sick or the already sick. So we need to make sure we have some stringent system in place where we're monitoring the teams and the staff that go in and out of these facilities.
I agree with you, because I do believe that the nurses at geriatric and in the private nursing homes should get preferential treatment in terms of COVID testing.
Yeah.
Because as I said, we cannot use the same approach we used in March and April in January and February at the height of the tourist season. We have to be able to amp our capacity to manage this. And God forbid that anyone working in a home who has had contact, who has not been traced, or who might not even know, goes to work, and despite all the stringent procedures that are taken in these institutions, that disease hits an institution with the elderly.
Yeah.
There will be no recourse. And I do agree that those nurses and caregivers need to be given priority in terms of testing. I love the idea about the blood pressure and testing, the incentives for blood pressure and sugar testing kits, because the Hope Foundation does that already. And that's a private entity. So there's nothing to stop the state from doing it. They've had enough money coming in for COVID-19 that some of it could be allocated to these areas that I have not heard discussed, because probably they've been discussed and we, the public, don't know. But Barbadians who are on the ground and who are involved in this society know that there are areas that are not being covered, and there are areas that are extremely important to all of us. And we need to be able to identify them and offer solutions rather than attacking ordinary Barbadians for following the lead of the government.
One last thing, Irene, when you're finished. Yeah.
You go ahead.
Right. I was saying that when you look also at the fact that with the clusters forming, and there may be additional need now to do more testing, more contact tracing, the Ministry of Health should also consider setting up facilities of drive-through testing, where they're not allowing persons to actually come to a facility, walk in, line up, queue up, touch, walk close to one another, so forth, to stop the gathering. So there's enough space around that we can actually have a couple of drive-through test facilities where it actually isolates persons as well.
I agree with you. Andre?
Yes, I'm still, yes, Irene.
Oh, I thought you you disappeared into the garden. But I want to jump now to the farmers and the prices that we hear that they're asking for, that people are being upset about during this particular pandemic. Do you think that they should be able to guarantee farmers a decent price for produce and basically encourage home delivery in the communities? Do you think that's an idea that we can put forward? Offer incentives for farmers who do that?
Yes, definitely. That's one of what I was getting onto earlier when I said that we need to treat agriculture, put it on the same footing as tourism. Now, the farmers this year didn't just have the COVID to deal with, but you remember that we came through a drought period. And then after the drought, we had heavy rainfall. So a number of farmers had high water bills. Those farmers who were not close to the BAMC and had to use water from the Barbados Water Authority, heavy water bills, and I'm talking about in the thousands of dollars. Government really needs to give those farmers a rebate on those water bills so that they can keep their business going. You need to treat farming as though it is a business, and that's a very high overhead, because I'm talking about some persons having water bills for over $30-something thousand.
Yes.
So you need to be able to subsidize that cost for them. Now, then you also had the situation where farmers lost crops when we had the heavy rainfall. That's why things like sweet peppers, you couldn't get much sweet peppers around the Christmas period or just before. And you would have lost lettuce, you would have lost other crops. Now, we need to find some way of being able to subsidize those farmers when you lose crops like that, because these persons were dependent upon these crops to give them some sort of income in terms of for Christmas. We also had issues too with the poultry industry as well. Because remember, there was a time where there was a complaint. You couldn't get any chickens. You heard a number of different stories,
Yeah.
but a number of farmers experienced problems with their poultry in that the birds were either dying at an alarming rate, so that if you budgeted for 100 birds and you say you normally get about 5% deaths, the mortality within the birds were a little bit higher. We don't know if this had anything to do with the impact in terms of being able to order and to supply. So we need to start looking at finding ways of giving farmers subsidies or lower income loan, some sort of insurance for small farmers, so that if you lose your crops, that you still have something that you can fall back on. And that would help us to be able to guarantee the pricing. Also, farmers need money up front in terms of perhaps we may need to look at the whole system of the rebate system. Farmers need money up front in order to get their land cultivated. The way it works currently is that you plow the land you take and you buy the fertilizers, you take in the documentation to the Ministry of Agriculture, and they will give you a rebate sometime after. Perhaps we need to start offering these subsidies up front, so that if you have 2 acres of land, but you only able to afford to plow an acre, if you had the subsidy up front, you can plow the entire 2 acres, put that into production, buy the fertilizer, buy everything, the sprays and everything that you need, and you'll be able to produce more, and you would be able to offer your crops at a better price, so that then the market would be getting the crops at a better price, because people want to see, you don't want to be spending $2.50 a pound for sweet potatoes and those sorts of things. You want to get these sweet potatoes at a good price. And if you encourage more people, there was a program started in the high part of the in terms of encouraging backyard farming. We need to get that in as well, in terms of encouraging more backyard farming, because the reality is, and even at this time, you saw the long lines in terms of getting in to the supermarkets. But if you can go to a vendor on the street, you could avoid that, and same time you are avoiding the spread of COVID as well, because you go to the persons within your neighborhood, less lines, less congestion, and you may be able to get things at a better price. So these are the things that we have to start thinking about. So it's not, agriculture is not just about growing, but agriculture also plays a part in terms of non-communicable diseases, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol. If you grow the right crops and you're eating the right food, you'll be able to help reduce all of those things. And all of those things are high risk for COVID. These are things that we need to pay attention to now, so that when persons are giving out food baskets, make sure that those food baskets contain the right produce, a good mix of healthy starches and a good mix of lettuce and leafy vegetables, so that you can have a proper diet. Those are the things that you need to eat healthy. You need the fruits as well too, because there are a number of persons that say because you're fighting COVID, you need to make sure that your immune system is functioning properly. So the Bajan cherry, high in vitamin C. All of our natural fruits here in Barbados, guava, high in vitamin C. These are the things that we need to start producing more. Soursop. There's so many health benefits of things like soursop. The vitamin C content, they say that it is good for persons with cancer and different illnesses. So imagine being able to get your soursop juices without any sugar, and these things that you're eating naturally, and that could help to build your immune system and help the body to be better able to fight off COVID. Obviously, nothing takes away from the hand sanitizing, the wearing the mask, and the social distancing as well. So there is a lot of potential for agriculture, and that is why we need to pay attention to it now as one of the areas that can help us see a different Barbados when to make it through and to get through this COVID crisis.
Thank you. And I agree with you. Coming to you now, Corey, about the labor situation again. And I'm sure you must have some ideas or some innovative suggestions for us mitigating or alleviating the current unemployment situation we have in Barbados. We know that we have an educated population, and we know that we have a number of persons who have been on furlough or laid off who probably would have had their benefits run out at present. Outside of ensuring that people get back the money they've paid into the system, what else do you think the government can do to assist some of these people who are at home at their wits' end?
Well, first thing, Irene, the government said a few days ago that they're going to reimburse the promoters for any perishable items that they would have expended resources on for these overnight events. And I hope that just the same way how they can find that money to do that, they can also find some appropriate, some further funds for the workers who are yet to receive all their unemployment benefits. In addition to that, obviously there's the 12 months, the 12 stamp program thing going on, 12-month stamp program going on. I think in addition to that, we can also look at our resources where we can get some remote employment for some of the employed workers. There's some international countries that also farm out work to people to perform remotely. I think as a place like Barbados, even myself as a self-employed person, I also look to always see where I can find remote work to do for persons from here in Barbados. And the government can look at doing that on a broad scale basis for persons too who are also unemployed, where they can also work from home and they can receive their money if it's directly signed, if they're directly paid either through wire to their bank books or that kind of thing. But that's certainly an option. In addition to that, Irene, I also want to look at the workers who are currently on the front line, because I believe the frontline workers in this country today are under so much pressure. And I believe that a hotline needs to be set up for workers where they can call and make complaints without being made to feel as if they're going to be victimized or they're going to lose their jobs.
True.
Also, the unions need to come up with a comprehensive work policy for employees in the workforce. How best will employees be just like how we set up remember like a fire. You remember what we call it now? Kind of like if you have a fire and you're going to have an emergency exit. We need to have a comprehensive work plan in place for the workers if they're going to have to, if someone comes down with COVID, how best do we respond to it? How will workers be transported from the workplace to home? Will they be sent directly to a quarantine facility? This is a comprehensive
internal policies.
Workers.
Yeah.
Also, the electronic bans. Know that the minister is talking about the electronic bans. Where will these be manned from? Will they be manned from hotels? Will they be manned from the airports? Who will actually do the manning of these electronic bans in case there's attempted tampering? These are the questions that we need to ask. And finally, counseling services. Professional counseling services need to be made available for the workers. You can imagine the amount of people. We saw all these businesses being listed over the weekend that are now being closed out of an abundance of caution for COVID. What about the workers now and their psyche? The workers who feel scared. Do they come into contact with someone? Do I have it? Don't I? Should I play with my kid when I go home? You also need to provide counseling services to deal with these people because it affects the motivation of persons when they go to work. You go back to the prison service. Can you imagine the level of employee morale in the prison service today? That is where I will leave. Those are my recommendations, Irene, and I will.
All right. Well, can you imagine? We only have a few more minutes and we have questions. It looked like we had a lot of time. I thought we had a lot of time, but I know that 90 minutes can go in a jiffy. I wanted to get back to Verla before we start the questions and make reference to a comment you made in your statement this week about the uneven handling of these situations in this country, because that is at the crux of a lot of our problems. Besides the fact that obviously the capacity to manage this event has been stretched to the limit because we've been using April and March capacity for February and January. It's obvious that the policing has fallen down to the fact that you're making phone calls to people that are telling them negative, and then people getting the wrong kind of message and going out in the streets, people being sent on public transportation when you know that policing dictates that not happen. balls are being dropped because I just don't think that the government has instituted the human resource capacity to manage and monitor every level. But I want you to come now to talk about the uneven handling of tourists and Barbadians, because we are yet to hear the Prime Minister tell the tourists what the position is with her and our country.
Correct, Irene. And it really started from the very beginning. The protocol handbooks, the very first protocol handbook that told tourists that they have to wear masks in public in Barbados is the last one. All of the rest said that mask wearing was mandatory at the airport. It didn't say anywhere else. So just starting from basics such as that. I mean, it is not mandatory in Barbados to wear a mask, all like no, but we have all been encouraged to wear our masks. And I think Barbadians have mandated it for themselves, since the government won't do it for them. They have mandated it for themselves that they would wear their masks in public. But the tourists need to be given these instructions explicitly. Up to this weekend, I was hearing of incidents from fellow patrons and also from members of staff at restaurants and at public venues where the tourists were actively resisting wearing their masks, actively resisting the social distancing. No, we get our fingers wagged at us and they get a reception at Ilara Court, but we need everybody on board in order for this to work. There cannot be any half-hearted measure. COVID, and this is an expression that I am borrowing now from my sister-in-law. COVID just needs one loophole. That's it. So we have to make sure that we do all in our power to close the loopholes. So when we see the bus crawl getting vilified, but even when pressed by questions, you can't get a word out of officials as the location of other clusters.
And the 33, I heard of journalists ask more than once about a breakdown of the 33, and then you heard we don't have that information at hand. That can't work.
When asked about the strain that you have here, which of course would give us a clue as to how it got here, we heard that we're waiting on PAHO to assist us with that investigation. No timelines are given. So unless the media at every press conference renews the question, or as we have done, the Democratic Labour Party issues a list of questions, because we need as a people to be kept informed. So we do this on behalf of the people of Barbados. We find that there's really an imbalance in how locals are treated. I'm thinking about how during the lockdown, breaches of quarantine and breaches of curfew were treated. I'm thinking in terms of the Jamaican national who admittedly was given a fine with an alternate prison sentence, but who is caught up in the prison chaos right now. And his sentence is 6 months. But we can't hear a word about who went to the airport. No, the protocols still exist that say don't call anybody's name. So I'm not going to call anybody's name. And I'm wondering exactly how ministers got to be calling people's names with impunity, flying in the face of protocols. But I am not going to go there with them. But we do know of an incident with 2 UK nationals who tried to leave the country. One was negative, one was positive. We cannot hear any update outside of reading the international media. to find out what is going on with that situation. I received information that I have not verified that the female was released, having been negative, but was she charged? We certainly haven't seen any report that she appeared in court. What is the position with the man in that incident? Is he still in isolation? Has he been released since then? We don't know, but we will see the Barbadian, we will see the Jamaican, but we can't see persons that we know exist. To this moment, we keep hearing about someone who left quarantine and went to a party, later discovered to be positive, and we can't get a word out. They would rather sweat in a press conference than give the information. We can't hear a word about that incident, and we should be informed, because persons who breach quarantine have placed the entire population in danger. We don't know where they have been. We are making wild and also educated guesses based on information that individual businesses and individual entities have released to the public via social media, the very social media that is now being vilified by exactly who exploited it to get where they are, right? And we know, we feel, and we see that there is a difference.
Okay.
We know, and it is not just that unevenness in the handling of COVID cases. We saw that unevenness in the handling of the stimulus package. We see that unevenness in the handling of almost every aspect of everything since 2018. And we are left with the feeling, that unshakable feeling, that two Barbadoses are being created right under our noses. But we, as the people of Barbados, we have a power. We think that we have power every 5 years. If there's one thing the present administration has shown us, is that you don't have to wait 5 years for agitation and to make a mark and to make a point. But the two Barbadoses is not sustainable. It feeds directly into the social unrest that we are experiencing, that we are feeling. And that unevenness is going to cause friction if it is not brought to a halt.
Point taken. Go ahead, Madam
The
President.
government needs to be upfront in every single instance. The same way that they can get on national TV and call out the name of the bus crawl and call out the name of one that hasn't even happened yet. They can call out the names in relation to other events that they are investigating for clusters. The same way they could ball out 3 prison officers. And of course, now we're hearing an alternate version of events. But the same way they could ball out 3 prison officers, they can ball out people who absconded, who escaped from quarantine in the same way. That is the only way that there is confidence in the information coming out from government, and that we as a people don't feel that we have to go and find it out for ourselves. Because when we have to be going and finding out information for ourselves, it means that we could do without this government.
Fair enough, and point taken, which leads us back to who is patient zero. Because if we know that the prison officers or there was COVID circulating within those circles since the early December, before Christmas, and we know that one person was working in a in an environment where they would have come into contact with a visitor who would have visited that in that particular environment. We are thinking Barbados and we can connect the dots. We did not have COVID here. That's why we had an election in the pandemic, because we were told there was no COVID in Barbados. And that was mere weeks ago. People were given.
In the pandemic, Irene, pardon me crossing you, with bus crawls, because we had motorcades.
True, true, true. So we need answers. We certainly do. And I am very happy with the alternatives that have been put on the table by this group of politicians and members of Barbados society, who are also thinking Barbadians, who have to live here and who have families and who have a stake in seeing that we come out of this pandemic safely. Now, we have some questions, Lashana, and I would wish you to field them for me or to send them through so that we can speak to them in the little time that we have left. Lashana, are you there?
Hi, yes, please, I am.
All right, so can we start with some questions quickly so that we can wind up probably in the next
problem.
15 minutes? Yes.
No problem. Question from the Nation newspaper is addressed to the President Verla de Pisa. Do we have any information as to the possible prior whereabouts of the prison officer who was on sick leave, possibly moonlighting on the West Coast?
I personally do not have that information in any verified way. What I will say is that persons who have tested positive are being kept in a particular place, and I would imagine that that prison officer is there. But I want you, Nation News, to take careful note of that question, write it down, and ask it at the next press conference, because we do not have the opportunity that you do to interface directly with those persons who are charged with the responsibility of keeping Barbadians safe, but you do. So the onus on the Fourth Estate is to ask those probing questions when you are given the opportunity to do so, and don't let up. And don't let up. When you get the answer to the question, not the fluff, the answer to the question is when you stop. Because I can't tell you who patient 0 is. Therefore, I am not able to tell you where patient 0 is. I can't tell you where that prison officer is of a certainty. What I can tell you is that I know where persons who have been tested positive are being housed. And I would like to hope that he is there, or she, because we haven't been told one way or yet the other. But I cannot, because I do not have that information with any verification, tell you that that is where that officer is at.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The next question is from Barbados Today. They have asked if would the DLP recommend a national lockdown in order to get a handle on the current COVID-19 crisis.
Okay, now, right after the All Year's Night, I'm pausing because that wasn't a press conference. Because when you get and talk to yourself and you don't invite questions, that's more like a press statement. Right after that, when we released the 12 questions, we also gave solutions, because that's what we like to do. We like to give solutions. And yes, our solution is that at this point in time, even if you have determined that we must keep tourism going, that we must continue with the welcome staff, that we have to find a balance and a way of living with COVID that allows us to have tourism in some form. At this present moment, in order to get ahead of the events that are still unfolding, we should not still have planes coming in. Each plane load is another couple hundred persons who have to be tested in the one lab. Best Dos Santos is the only lab that we have. So even if they manage to test everybody in the contact tracing, they then have to add them to the number of persons who are coming in still. And I want to take a pause here to say kudos to the last Democratic Labour Party administration for having the foresight to have a lab in Barbados instead of having to send overseas for testing so that we can get back our results quickly. And a lab that is accredited. And again, they have to reach back and use Blackman and Gollop School, which was purpose built for emergencies under the last administration. But I segue and I needed to do that. But the direct answer to your question is yes, right now we need, the Prime Minister said it, but she actually needs to do it. We need to take a pause, and part of that pause is to close ourselves off for the time being, even include, I mean, every time there's a press conference, we're expecting a lockdown. And despite saying that I almost said the wrong thing, you have the nerve to press the brakes, you don't do it. So we're still flying headlong down the hill because you haven't press the brake. Don't tell me you can if you don't. It's still a suicide mission.
Autopilot.
Next
At least
question, Lashana.
Autopilot has something running it. I am not satisfied that there's anybody sitting at this wheel, because you can't with one breath say, don't panic, take a pause. And then with the next breath, don't pause at all. We must take that pause. We must stop, get ahead of it, get on top of the situation, get us back to where we were at the end of August, where we were almost 100% certain that COVID was not amongst us. Let us get back there, and then we can look and see how best we move Barbados forward. It doesn't have to be in the same way. It doesn't have to be in the same way, which is the whole point of this discussion.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The next question is from Capital Media HD. The question is, are you satisfied with the electronic Bluetooth bans that Dr. Jerome Walcott spoke of? And do you think the government should police the tourists at all quarantine centers in the island?
Okay. I'm not sure how one is satisfied with something that you don't know anything about. We were told at the last press conference that come Wednesday, we will have these monitors. We have not been told tight that we could go and do our own research. They're definitely not giving us any information, but they're also not giving us enough that we could go and do our own research. So we don't know what type of electronic monitoring that they are looking at. I don't know if it is the kind that is similar to a Fitbit. I don't know if it is more akin to the kind that you would use with probation and in the criminal context. So I cannot tell you that I am satisfied with it. What I can tell you is that what they had before was a total and complete waste of time. I saw firsthand the ban, and anybody with a scissors or a razor would have been able to free themselves of it. It was like a fat ban. It was slightly thicker than a fat ban.
Hi, good night, Madam President. I don't mean to interrupt you. I was just made to understand that these specific details were mentioned on the CBC Evening News, so we'll be better equipped to address that question afterwards.
Okay, because we're here, we're not at the CBC News, so I'm not able to give you that. But without those specifics, I cannot tell you that I am satisfied, but I will say this. no matter how sophisticated an electronic monitor is, it is of zero value if it is not actually monitored. And we have had a situation here where we have been lapsing in monitoring. It is the only way that we could have so many examples of quarantine breach. There were lapses in monitoring. And that gets me to the second question, and that is, we have to take charge of the monitoring ourselves. This is not something that we should cede to the hotels. Yes, they are quarantining at hotels, but that management should be the COVID management unit or some other unit that you create that manages the monitoring, that has policing capabilities, that is more than a security guard and can actually downhand you and arrest you appropriately attired, clearly, because you don't know the full status of the persons, but that you can actively do something to literally arrest any potential breach. We were lucky that we caught 2 at the airport. The rest we know about because the issue blew up into something more. But we have been hearing stories all along about persons walking about their own hotels, leaving the compound and going someplace else and coming. We've been hearing these stories for a while. So unless you are going to have proper monitoring, then there's no point wasting money buying sophisticated equipment.
Which speaks to the capacity of the government to manage at this present time. And it goes back to the statement made earlier. It is evident that the capacity was not built up to manage the height of the tourist season. We seem to be managing on the capacity of March, April of this year, when we were basically now seeing the effects of this disease or this virus. But it does not seem as if there was any cohesion between tourism and health and the COVID monitoring unit to prepare based on the projections we knew we were going to have for winter from countries where we knew the citizens are difficult to manage even home at them.
Okay, Irene, there.
Shauna, 1 second, please. The real measurement for me is capacity at the lab, because it doesn't really matter if you beef up the personnel taking the swabs and if you beef up the personnel monitoring quarantine, if there's still going to be a bottleneck at the one lab that we have. So that really should be our benchmark for capacity. Can our lab handle 2,000 in a day? Even if we move it to a 24-hour operation, I don't mind that. Have 3 shifts of 8, that's fine. Can they handle 2,000 a day, 3,000 a day, whatever that capacity is? We should be using that as our benchmark then in terms of who we allow in and how we allow them in.
And you could only predict that capacity by getting from the BHTA what the projections were for occupancy for the season. That's what you do. You sit down with everybody and you look at these figures. Next question, LaShawna, please.
Yes, please. There are only 2 questions remaining. The next question could be answered by the President Verla de Pisa or Andre Worrell. The question is from Capital Media HD. How realistic is it to focus on agriculture and small business at this time to sustain the Barbados economy?
All right, thank you, LaShawna, thank you, LaShawna and Capital Media for that question. It is very realistic to focus on agriculture because, well, if you're thinking about us being in lockdown, with agriculture, persons do have the capacity to work and adhere to social distancing. The same thing could be done for manufacturing and small and cottage industries, because realistically with cottage industries, these are already in homes. And normally it will be families who will be doing these business. Same thing with agriculture. It will probably be close to the home and families. And yes, we can look at it and realistically invest in it, because we still need to have that capacity to be able to feed yourself. You just need to provide the persons with the adequate resources. And I'm certain from the business perspective that Ryan will probably have a little to say on that as well too.
Yes. First of all, the capacity to replace the loss or the fallout from tourism is not an overnight task. Assisting hotels and assisting business in general will not 100% fill the gap. So we first have to come to that realization. What we're saying is that you have to start flipping the script and balancing your opportunities within the economy so that you're able then to grow and be sustainable in other areas. And as we said, for the stats speak for itself. 92% of the formal businesses in Barbados are small businesses. So that means that if you support them, you will be successful. You will be able to drive that employment contribution of 45% approximately to maybe 55 in the short term, 55%, 60% in the short term, but you will fill some gaps. And compared to the programs that they're set out, they're not filling the gaps 100%. The best program had just about a dozen participants as well. So a lot of hotels are not participating in it. So a lot of people are still at home, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, we have to take it in context. And the context is that you need to balance our expectation, balance our funds, and make sure that we put resources and chances and opportunities in other areas in this economy so that we have a better chance of actually coming out of this short term, medium term, and in the long term.
Thank you very much for your responses. The final question is from, okay, I just got a message here, so let me first correct myself. The final question is from Starcom Network News. The final question is, what is the DLP's best fit model for the management of the pandemic in Barbados?
Yes.
I think we can all answer, but you can do it and we can add if we need to.
Okay, yes. Let me start at the macro and work my way down, because that way then the others can fill in their micro sectors. But this allows us to end where we started. And that is that we mustn't only be viewing COVID responses in the moment. COVID has given us the opportunity to think outside of the box, and we need now to be crafting a Barbados that includes our citizens as much as possible. So this moment is the one that we should be taking to decide how we fit everything together. We will have the same puzzle pieces making up Barbados, but we're juxtaposing them in a different way. For certain, we don't have our education spokesperson on tonight. We will deal with education separately, but for certain, education is a linchpin where that is concerned. We identified tonight just two: small business and medium-sized businesses, and agriculture, and how we can build them out as businesses. And of course, we have tied it all together in relation to our people, the labor, and the representation that we need to have to show a different way to do it. And that really is how the Democratic Labour Party, on behalf of the people of Barbados, is presenting an alternative. That we don't only look to be in a holding pattern for the duration of COVID, however long that is, but that we are proactive with it, that we have often said, we have often heard, and we repeat, is probably the better way to put it, that there's opportunity in a crisis. But unless we actually activate those opportunities, and as a government create space for people to operate in their own imaginations, because it can't only come from government. People have ideas that they want to develop, and it is for government to open up that capacity. So that really is how we see the dealing with COVID. We're going to have COVID around for a while. I'm satisfied of that. We are now 1 year in for sure, and we are already seeing mutations. So it's likely around for a while. That means then that we don't have an argument for maintaining what we were before COVID. We have a much better argument for crafting a completely different construct of what Barbados is, what Barbados means to its people, how our people function in Barbados, and yes, how the tourists fit into that picture. But they are a piece of the puzzle. They are not the entire puzzle. So we need to have all of them working together, not in little pockets off by themselves, and most assuredly not shutting out our people or making them feel like second-class citizens with uneven handling of issues. Irene, I will leave it up to you as to how any of the others put meat on that bone.
Well, I think that everyone spoke to the areas that we felt that we should be able to manage in this pandemic. Ryan spoke to making sure that we don't find deficiencies in the QEH where we focus, or in the polyclinics as well, where we focus solely on COVID-19. He spoke to making sure that our persons with the NCDs, which we said were about 60% of the population, are not neglected, and that they be given some incentive to have their blood pressure and blood testing monitoring kits either free or at some reduced rate so that they can work at home with their health. We also spoke to Ryan spoke to the possibility of using technology more so that people can manage their health at home, so that our health system is not congested. And I spoke to capacity in terms of having the capacity that we had in March and April, and it seems very evident that we're still using that same capacity, meaning human resource capacity, where you have the persons who are supposed to enforce not seemingly able to keep up with the influx of cases that we're getting, even with persons giving information on tests, calling now, people being sent out to catch public transport. It seems as if this country has become overwhelmed and has been surprised by the winter tourist season. And I'm saying we need to sit down with BHTA, get the numbers from them, look at projections, and the government look and see how they can employ more Barbadians to assist in enforcing what is our policy and what is our procedure going forward. Andre spoke to the agricultural sector and the importance of it in terms of cottage industries, in terms of the fact that those cottage industries can contribute to the economy as at present. And I'm sure that he would wish to, what I would say, embellish that a bit in closing.
If I could just add one item too as well, because the question asking how we would manage the pandemic right now, and we also need to think about the households and in terms of the level of fear and panic as well. Fear and panic is good because when you're dealing with a health crisis, you need to, fear helps to bring about compliance. So we need to be upfront with persons with regard to the information. And also persons will be worried if we have to get to the lockdown situation. If we have community spread, we will probably be in a lockdown situation as we were before, where you may have to go back to the alphabet system, and persons would also be without jobs. So we need to have a system in place where you can provide direct support to families, and not just on a political basis, or not just, but direct support in terms of subsidies to families. You're hearing it now in the US in terms of the $2,000 check that they're hoping for. We need to provide direct support to families like that, and also direct support in terms of making sure that everyone have access to food and all of the basic necessities that they need. And then if we do the whole thing again in terms of the moratorium on the mortgages and stuff like that, the banking sector needs to be a little bit more compliant with people, because obviously if you're going into a situation again where persons will not be able to pay their mortgages, you need to be a little bit more compliant with persons. If people are not worrying about these things, they will do the things that are necessary to make sure that they do not spread the virus. And that's the important thing. We need to be able to control the spread of the virus as well.
Corey, re-emphasize your recommendation for the mental health attention and the personal attention to our citizens who are currently really and truly suffering.
Thank you, moderator. Let me just say in closing, just to go back to one of our key points tonight to get that key message out. Just the whole government has been speaking about digitizing this economy. In the COVID environment, we can also seek to take the whole digitalization aspect further. Look at outsourcing work from international companies for persons here to perform, persons who are unemployed. There are a myriad of areas, especially in administration, like research, marketing, accounting, advertising. These are the things that persons can be doing from home for international countries. Right by here at home, we need to put in place a COVID protocol in the workplace for employees. We cannot have this craziness we've seen over the last few days with the G4S workers. There have even been other workers in the hospitality sector who've been taking the buses to go to the polyclinic to find out if they're to be tested, and they don't know what their status is. They're in lines, they're not socially distanced properly. It's just been crazy, and we need to have a protocol in place in the workplace. How do we manage any COVID outbreak, or if a member comes down with COVID, how do we manage it in the workforce for our employees? In addition to that, we speak about the importance of mental health. No time is more important than now to have a psychologist, a mental expert to be on hand to talk to persons, even if they need to do it on the phone. And finally, you would have seen on social media so many times persons are making little videos speaking about the breaches that they're seeing at work. Some are saying that they can't wear equipment, and others are saying if they wear it, they're going to be victimized. And they want to, but they can't because they have a family they have to support. And we need to have some kind of hotline set up where workers can make calls, and these things can be actioned. Research can be put into them. Investigations can be made without workers being made to feel as if they will be victimized. And finally, in my opinion, I really think we need to get radical and give workers the opportunity. If they don't feel comfortable in the workforce and they want to take a week home or 2 weeks home because of what they suspect may be going on, they can do it and not feel as if they are going to be terminated. We are seeing it in the international community in sports. If you don't want to play in the COVID environment, you're allowed to stay home and still be paid. And that is something that we may have to look at. The government is speaking about this bundle of reserves that they have. Put them to uses and stop looking at them. They have to pay back for them.
Ryan?
Thank you.
Any closing statements?
Yes, I fully agree with all the sentiments of my comrades. I think the reset really is, as the president has been saying, let's get a real pause. Let's do a full assessment of the quarantine facilities, all the hotels and the villas that are in this midst. Over 100 have been listed. How can we manage them? How do we restrict the number to control the traffic? How can we monitor them better? Also, you have hotels acting as hybrids. Some people are quarantined, some people are vacationing. So a whole rationalization of the hotel stock needs to come into play here by the Ministry of Health. It has to be a system where it is very clear for us as locals that we understand that when a person comes in, the amount of time they have to be isolated for, how they go to the hotels, how long they stay, the type of hotel, the access or the lack of access for them and the public to the hotel, and different things. All to make sure that the movement, that we are comfortable with the movement of people coming in to the country. Putting on a monitoring device is definitely not enough without actual physical control. We don't want to be running people, running down Second Street or running down bars. People is not the purpose. We need to make sure we have full structures to make ourselves comfortable. We are complying generally, and we want to be out and about, patronizing business, doing our business, going to work, and while following the protocols. And we've been doing a good job, so we should not be penalized, but definitely the government needs to reset, we prioritize, come strategic, and lay out a proper plan that we are comfortable with. And that's it.
Thank you. So in closing, I would like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. We've had a very rich discussion. We ran over the time we said we would be discussing certain things, but it was worth it. We clearly see that this administration needs to amp up its efforts, be more strategic. We've done excellent before. Prior to this, we as people in Barbados kept COVID at bay. We did our part, and we would ask now that the government do its part. We do not wish persons to drop their guard, and we do not wish persons to panic. But by the same token, we wish full information. We need to know everything. If we're to stay away from social media, we must have full transparency, Prime Minister. It cannot be that you have it both ways. We will not be shut out of the information because we will get it one way or another. This is 166 square miles, and every last person has a cell phone. Barbadians, as I said, have done well. We would wish also that when the Barbadians are being scolded, that the visitors be also told what is expected of them in just as strong terms, so that we, the people, do not feel that we live in two societies. We are all one. We show love to everyone who comes to Barbados, and we would love all who come here to show us the same love and respect for our policies and procedures. And the only way that they can do that and understand that we are not here to be taken advantage of is if it comes from the top, the leadership of the Prime Minister and her team. With that, again, I would say thank you to my colleagues and everyone else who was here this evening. Please be advised that this is the first in many going forward this year where the Democratic Labour Party and we as citizens of Barbados will come to you for discussion. Thank you very much and good night.